Hey guys, what's up? It is your friendly neighborhood UberGoose here. I want to do a guide for you guys today. This is going to be a Restoration Druid guide in patch 7.1 of World of Warcraft Legion. And first things first, of course, if you want to be playing a Resto Druid, you need to have a good transmog. And obviously, my transmog is wonderful. The main point of a good transmog as a Resto Druid is that everybody knows you're a Druid, so you want to look as much like an animal as physically possible. So basically have as many feathers and vaguely animal-like things going on. You know, we got some extra antlers. Obviously, I'm a Tauren, so I already innately am an animal. But you know, the more you can do, the better. Secondly, this guide, the location that this is taking place is, of course, the most druidic area in the entirety of World of Warcraft, and that is Gallywix's Pleasure Palace. So, let's get right into it and start talking about all of the things that you should really be knowing as a Resto Druid. We'll start off with the most basic thing, and that is the talents. The talents are actually pretty cool. I really like the talents because there's a lot of variability in the talents, and they all actually change the way that you play the game, which is really neat. Those are the kind of things that I really like about talents. So first things first, historically in Legion, in 7.0 at least, there was a very large amount of people who were huge proponents of going the Prosperity Soul of the Forest build for raids and going this general build for 5-mans. But as it turns out that this general build is actually quite good for raiding as well, especially with the 7.1 patch slightly buffing cultivation, slightly nerfing prosperity as well. Those things kind of shifted the balance just a little bit. And even before 7.1, some people actually had tried out this build and found it to be better for them. I have yet to use this build in a progression raid, so I'm not certain if it is in fact better. I'm assuming it's better, because every single top druid is doing this build. Obviously in raids, you instead of Germination go Inner Peace or Spring Blossoms, depending on the fight. But I'm going to trust the top druids, and also I've used this build for 5-mans since the beginning of Legion, and I know for a fact that this build is quite strong. So let's get right into it and actually talk about the talent choices and why we've chosen those things. So first of all, in the tier 15, we are going to go with Cenarian Ward. Again, if you're doing raiding and you're not so certain, I personally did all of the progression up to this point using Prosperity Soul of the Forest, but let's talk about why we're no longer running Prosperity. So Prosperity got a slight nerf. Swiftman has 2 charges, and its cooldown is reduced by 3 seconds. Prior to 7.1, it was 5 seconds. That gave it a 25-second recharge time per charge. Obviously, they couldn't charge past each other, right? Like if you had to just use 2 Swiftmens, you would only charge up 1, and then once that one's ready, then the next one would start, right? And the main benefit of this was to synergize with Soul of the Forest, and the very slight nerf, the 2-second nerf to this, is honestly not the big deal. Mostly it's the buff to cultivation, which is why we don't do it anymore. And as it turns out that Swiftmend is very strong right now. You see my numbers are here. They're a little bit different because I'm pretty deep into my artifact tree, and I actually have a few points in natural mending. I have 2 points in plus a relic, so 30% more healing. But at base, Swiftmend is going to heal a little bit under Cenarian Ward. The main difference, of course, being that Cenarian Ward is also a heal over time effect. So it actually does, even right now, Swiftmend is doing 357,000-ish, and Cenarian Ward's going to be doing 323,000. Cenarian Ward will actually be healing more than Swiftmend, just in general, because it is a heal over time effect, and every heal over time effect makes all of your healing to the target increase. It's increased by a percent equivalent to your mastery. In my case, I have 19.2% mastery, so every single heal over time effect I do on a target will increase all the healing they receive from me by 19.2%. So if I have 2 hots on them, it's going to go up by 38.4%. Very simple, very easy to understand. More hots, more healing. Even the very first hot, right, a rejuve, this will automatically be healing more than 177,000, simply because this counts as a hot. This is more mastery, right? It's saying, you see that number, the 25,000 right there, and then you see this ticking for 30,000, right? That's kind of the mastery at work. So mastery is a huge deal, and as such, it makes Cenarian Ward very, very powerful. Definitely better than having a second Swiftmend. It's also more mana efficient, and it has synergies with things such as Flourish, or if you have the Legendary Bracers, which extend heal over time effects, it also has great synergy with those. So in general, Cenarian Ward is going to be better than a second charge of Swiftmend. It's even better because its cooldown is independent. You have that quirk of multi-charge abilities where if both are used, it'll only recharge one and complete recharging that one before working on the next. If I was in a situation where I said, oh god, I need to Cenarian Ward, and then I did it, right? I threw a Cenarian Ward on somebody, and then of course that lines up with Prides, so people who who don't play Resto Druid are probably like, why did it shield? It doesn't shield, it's just, yeah, anyway. And then I'm like, oh god, I need to Swiftmend, look at this, right? They're recharging independently. This is just better than having two different Swiftmend charges, right? So very, very powerful, very good. This is, in general, better than having two Swiftmend charges, just straight up. And the 3-second cooldown reduction means you'll get maybe one extra Swiftmend in an entire fight, and you get one extra from having two charges. So at most, you're going to have like 2 extra Swiftmends in an entire raid fight, and that's not very good, unless you're utilizing Soul of the Forest, and then that's quite good. But, again, we'll talk about that when we get there. Abundance is garbage. Throw it out the window. Doesn't exist. That's not true. It's fine. It's just not good enough. The problem with Abundance is that you need, like, a critical mass of rejuvenations out before you actually begin to get benefit from Abundance, and the number of rejuves is generally too high. You could make it work with, like, 4 rejuves, sure, and then your healing touch would go 40% faster, which in my case would make it a 1.3 second cast, but then I'll just regrowth, right? Like, it's the same speed, and the healing is actually relatively close, right? Especially with the 7.1 buff to regrowth, kind of because they changed it so other specs get regrowth instead of healing touch, and so they buffed the upfront healing of regrowth a bit with it. So in general, I mean, like, why would I not just be using regrowth? You know, if I have to get 4 rejuves out before healing touch is like even castable, why would I not just regrowth? Like, they both crit. Regrowth was like a few thousand lower, but it also has the heal over time effect, which also increments mastery and such. Obviously the main difference is that regrowth is about 2 times the mana cost, so it's inefficient, but you have so many more efficient heals, so many better things for raid healing than spot healing with a slightly faster healing touch. And then the effect it gives to regrowth is fine. You know, it's the same deal. You need a certain critical mass before it actually becomes good. In my case, I have 20% crit, and regrowth has an extra 40%, so it has 60%. That would mean about 4 rejuves before it's good. 3 you could probably get away with. It would crit a very large amount of the time, but 4 for guaranteed crits. And that's fine, again, but like, if you're getting that many rejuves out, you're already healing so much that you don't really need the bonus from Abundance. I could see it working in Mythic Pluses in very like specific sort of circumstances. I would think that this is mostly a throughput at the cost of mana ability, and this is more of an efficiency thing, but it's also really good at throughput on one single target, right? That's kind of the way I see it. The second tier is very straightforward. You're just taking Displacer Beast. Renewal's fine if there's no movement whatsoever, and Wild Charge is never okay. So just take Displacer Beast, get used to it. Being able to blink and then sprint is very, very good. Also make sure to jump right at the end of your buff timer, like watch your buffs and jump right at the end for that extra like 1%, you know, sort of bonus, I guess. You get the move speed that you had you know, in that time frame. Like, it wore off, but you already were locked into the speed from the jump. Just do it, whatever. It's a minor thing. Listen, I'm all about like small percentage plays, all right? That's my kind of thing. If you don't want to do it, you know what? Be lazy. I don't need to see if I care. For the affinity tier, Guardian is going to be the default, simply because it reduces all the damage you take by 6%, 9% if you have the Echo Wraith legendary chest. But 6% damage reduction is great. This gives you your second of 2 passives that are defensive. So every spec, of course, has a passive. Balance has the Astral Influence, Feral that has the Feline Swiftness, Guardian has Thick Hide, and then Resto has Ysera's Gift. And then you get an affinity at level 45 that allows you to get a second one of them. And in general, Ysera's Gift and Guardian Affinity are both just the defensive traits. So you're going to take them both. If you're Guardian, you're going to take Resto Affinity, and if you're Resto, you're going to take Guardian Affinity. And if you're Feral or Balance, you're probably going to take Guardian Affinity because it's a slightly stronger defensive trait, right? It's very slightly stronger than Ysera's Gift because Ysera's Gift doesn't do well with burst damage, while Guardian Affinity always helps you out in burst damage, and raids are quite a bit of burst damage. Emerald Nightmare has quite a few rot fights, but even in those, I think Guardian Affinity is probably stronger, but it doesn't matter because you get both as Resto. So there you go. And it also gives you the oh shit button of going bear and maybe, you know, taunting off of the tank and saving the group by being a god. But that probably won't happen. Just keep dreaming. For the 60 tier, you have Mighty Bash, Mass Entanglement, and Typhoon. You're just going to take Typhoon. Mighty Bash is fine, I think, if you have Cephas' Secret, which is the legendary ring that triggers off of CC effects, as the only thing that you have innately as a druid to trigger it is Entangling Roots. I, as a Tauren, also can War Stomp. And that's about it. Mighty Bash also triggers it, so that would be the only situation that I think taking that would be okay. And even then, obviously, in raids, it's not very good, while Typhoon is very good. This is a great ability because it allows you to like position things, right? Like it just shoves stuff directly in front of you in the direction that you're facing, right? And it's really, really powerful, especially in Emerald Nightmare on Il'gynoth. Very, very good on Il'gynoth, where basically you kill stuff around the room, kill ads around the room, and then little ichors, little bubbly, whatever things pop out. Ichors, they're ichors, right? And then they start running after a certain person. It'll fixate, and generally everybody runs them in front of the eye that's at the base of the tree. Let's say this is the tree, right? So everybody wants to run them in front of the eye. But what you can do with Typhoon, in case the ichors are coming from here to here, and it's taking too long, you can just Typhoon them, and even though that looked like it was going left, it went forward. And then it'll just push them in, and ideally at that point you'll be able to land an AoE stun and such, and you can even toss out an Ursul's Vortex to make sure that they don't escape. And it's very good in that sort of situation. Also very good in Mythic Pluses. There are 2 affixes that I can think of off the top of my head where it's actually really good. Those would be Necrotic and Sanguine. Necrotic is, they stack up a healing debuff on people that they hit. All of the trash mobs in the instance do that. And if your tank gets to too many stacks and the trash mob is still alive, what you could do is you could Typhoon him away. Tank could run away from the mobs, let his stacks fall off, right, because they have a duration, and then come back in and clean them up. And with Sanguine, some mobs will just cast forever and they won't actually move. It drops puddles that heal enemies and damage you. So some enemies will just not move and they'll just stand in a puddle and cast forever, and there's no way you can kill them until you wait for the Sanguine to time out. Or you could be a druid, and that's not the hockey, and do that. You just push them. You just give them a big old Typhoon, and that's pretty much it. So Typhoon is really good, has a lot of uses, very, very helpful ability. Get used to it. 75 tier, we actually have some choices. All 3 are technically viable. Again, like I said earlier, the way people are going now is Cultivation in general. Reason being, this is another heal over time effect. It heals for about a little bit under the heal per second of Rejuvenation, which makes it quite strong. Because, of course, Rejuvenation already gets the 15% bonus healing from your artifact, right? And, Cultivation doesn't get any of that. So Cultivation, the fact that it almost heals as much as Rejuve is quite strong. And Rejuve is kind of our barometer for like what is a good heal, what is an efficient heal, etc. So the fact that Cultivation heals almost as much is pretty good. It's not obviously like the total amount, but it's heals per second. Cultivation is close to Rejuve. So it's effectively like a second Rejuve without having a second Rejuve from Germination. Obviously, it has the prerequisite of people hitting 60% health, but if somebody has a Rejuve on them, right, and then they hopefully don't die from this fall, it shouldn't be that high, right, and then whenever it ticks, then they get Cultivation, right? You don't have to apply it after they're under 60%. As long as it ticks, and they're under 60% when Rejuve ticks, then it'll apply Cultivation, right? And that's awesome. Right, like you saw how much healing that was. Obviously, there was Ysera's Gift to mix in there for the 72k and kind of threw it off a little bit, but it's very good. It's very, very good. As long as you're predicting damage spikes well, which you should be in raids, Cultivation is going to get so much mileage, and obviously it has this awesome benefit of being a heal over time effect. Therefore, everybody who has a rejuve on them, right, when they get Cultivation, that's immediately 2 stacks of your mastery, right? It's just 2 times your mastery in increased healing on that target. That includes the healing that Cultivation and Rejuvenation are going to get. So this talent is insane. It's actually really, really powerful. Now, the other talent that competes with it in the tier is Soul of the Forest. And this one competes with it because of that final line right there. Increases the healing of your wild growth by 75%. So basically the way this works is every time you Swift Mend, you get a buff. You consume the buff by casting Rejuve, Regrowth, or Wild Growth, and it'll amplify them. If it's Rejuve or Regrowth, it'll triple the healing. If it's Wild Growth, it'll almost double the healing. And that's pretty much it. And you're always going to be using it. If you are using Soul of the Forest, use it on Wild Growth always. I'm serious. Always. And the reason they use it on Wild Growth is because this is your raid healer, right? This heals 6 different people for a good chunk of healing over 7 seconds, starting high and then getting low over the duration, making it actually quite good innately against heal sniping. So like by default, Wild Growth is good against other smart heals, kind of like Wild Growth, because sometimes healers will, in a raid setting, step on each other's toes without even realizing it, because their smart heals will kind of overlap, and you don't want that, right? And smart heals, of course, what I mean is heals that'll target, quote, random people, but it'll choose people who have less health over people who have more health, right? So with Wild Growth, with heal over times in general, heal sniping is very present because, you know, if I'm healing, right, like let's say, let's take some more damage. If I'm healing, right, and there's this heal over time, it's got 10 seconds left, and you see my health going, somebody else sees this health bar and goes, they need a heal. And then, you know, they'll throw out a heal. Theirs will be more than mine, obviously. But, yeah, that's what people will do. So they'll snipe, right? And they won't even notice that you have Rejuve on them, obviously, and that's pretty unfortunate, but it happens. But Wild Growth is kind of innately good against that because the bulk of the healing is in the first couple seconds. I don't know how low the healing gets specifically. Like, I guess I could check, right? So start at 35k. Oh, no, it starts at 17k and then gets down to 11. So it actually doesn't descend that low, but you saw, right? It had a steady decline over the duration. So it's already kind of innately good against other smart heals. So like this is your raid healer. It's very, very good. And you always want to combo Soul of the Forest with it, even though if you look at this, it's like, oh, but Soul of the Forest does a higher percent to Regrowth and Rejuve. Well, the problem is that Regrowth and Rejuve will only heal one person. And if you're using Regrowth, that's a lot of mana you're spending just to spot heal 2 people. One, of course, for the Swift Mend to trigger it, and then the other for the Regrowth, right? You just spent, in that case, 70,000 mana just to spot heal 2 people. That's a lot of mana just for 2 people being spot healed. What you could do instead is use the 30,000 from Swiftmend and then the 70,000 from Wild Growth to raid heal 6 people at a 75% increase, right? Very simple, very, very easy to understand. And then obviously it has great synergy because you get to, it kind of snapshots that. So when you use Flourish, it'll extend the duration by 6 seconds. And if it was empowered by Soul of the Forest, then those extra 6 seconds will also have the 75% bonus. So it's very good. It definitely has a lot of application. And this is what I was using up until very recently. Pretty much 7. I mean, even into 7.1, I like knew about this build, but I didn't want to change because I wasn't comfortable with it. I didn't have like an understanding of it yet. So I still ran with Soul of the Forest, and it's still fine, right? It's still totally okay. I parsed like top 90% or whatever, which is fine, right? Incarnation is also fine. It's a little undertuned compared to the other two. The main issue with Incarnation is that if you're using a 3-minute cooldown to increase your throughput for, 30 seconds or whatever, or even efficiency or both, I guess, because it makes Rejuve cost less mana, like, why not just use Tranquility, like... In the same sort of sense, like, why not use Tranquility? And if you're in the situation where, oh, but I need to use it more often than every 3 minutes, it's nice to have 2 different cooldowns, why not just grab Inner Peace and then you have 2 minutes on Tranquility, right? You have enough cooldowns already. You have plenty of throughput. You don't need Incarnation to increase your throughput even more. And also, it's not throughout the whole fight. Like, most of the time, you're going to be using it once in a fight, simply because the intensity of healing at the start of the fight is never really going to be high enough to pop Incarn immediately. You're going to want to save it for, like, a certain moment. And if that moment happens to be less than 3 minutes out from the boss kill, then you're not going to get more than one use. Even if you get 2 uses out of Incarn, it's not so great. It really just doesn't do enough is the problem. It's still fine though. If you like playing with Incarn, go for it. Just keep in mind that when you're using Incarn, you want to use Wild Growth 3 times, right? Because it has a 10-second cooldown, which means that if you use it right at the start, you'll be able to use it 2 more times, because it has a cast time and such, because Incarn lasts 30 seconds. So you'll be able to use this 3 times. So what you'll want to do is generally go like rejuve people, right? You want to be going rejuve until maybe 5-ish seconds in, then do a Wild Growth, rejuve for the next 10 seconds, Wild Growth, rejuve for the next 10 seconds, Wild Growth, and then finish out with whatever, right? The final like 2 or 3 seconds, you can finish out with casting whatever. Just never cast Regrowth, okay? Promise me, if you use Incarn, right? If you're the kind of guy who's like, I like Incarn, don't touch this button, right? Just don't. Put it down, all right? Stop, don't, okay? Don't, thank you. So it's pretty much that simple. The 90 tier is where stuff gets a bit more interesting. The 5-man build, default, you're going Germination. This is the highest throughput, but it's also incredibly mana inefficient, and it also becomes really difficult to use at higher number of players, simply because all of your rejuvenations are ticking. Being able to double rejuve people is not very good, right? It's not an efficient use of global cooldowns to double rejuve people. So in raids, you're pretty much going to go Spring Blossoms or Inner Peace, and it's just dependent on the fight. If you can use Tranquility to good effect every 2 minutes, Inner Peace. If you can't, Spring Blossoms. It's pretty much that simple. Don't have to overthink it. Just understand that if you're taking Spring Blossoms, you always want this to be down, so have something to track it. I don't, because I'm a lazy piece of shit, but definitely have something to track it, whether it be a bar. I know on the default UI there's like a little circle that ticks down. Even on these uniframes that I have, there's like a default bar that goes down, but it's clunky and I don't like the look of it, so I'm going to make a weaker at some point. But definitely have something to track it. Last 30 seconds. You just want to make sure that you're keeping it up at least for the majority of the fight. Even if it's not 100% of the fight, you know, keep it up for a lot of the fight. If you're taking Spring Blossoms. If you're taking Inner Peace, you still want this to be up a lot if people are going to be standing in it long enough, but I personally don't use it very often on a fight like Ursoc because we move too much. People aren't going to like get the effective healing for long enough, and it's very expensive, right? It costs 50,000 mana. It's more than a regrowth. Obviously, it'll pretty much always heal more than a regrowth, but it is still very expensive. But that's pretty much it for the 90 tier. And then the 100 tier is even simpler. You take Flourish. That's pretty much it. Stonebark is situationally good in 5-man content if you need to be using Ironbark more often. In a raid, this is never going to be enough, right? It's never going to give you enough healing in a raid setting to be worth it. And Moment of Clarity, you really don't want to be casting regrowths on people who don't have other hots on them, because it's very inefficient anyway. Like, it's not a great use of time is the main issue. So when you get a clear casting, a lot of the time you're literally just going to cast regrowth on the tank, because they already have like 2 or 3 hots on them, and getting the extra hot from the regrowth is just going to kind of compound on that and help out a lot. But being able to cast 3 regrowths every time Omen of Clarity procs, who cares? It really doesn't matter much, right? That's a lot of mana saving, but you can actually save a lot of mana with Flourish as well, and Flourish actually has raid healing benefits. So definitely just go with Flourish. Stonebark, again, if you want to fiddle around with it in 5-mans, go for it. But I used to go with this, but then I saw the light and saw the Flourish Cenarian Ward combo and began to use it, and I'll never go back ever again. So there you go. Those are the talents. They're pretty straightforward. Lots of choices. I know, like 20-something minutes, you're thinking, that was straightforward? Yeah, I mean, compared to the rest of this stuff with Resto Druid, yeah, those were pretty straightforward. Let's talk about the artifact. So the artifact is pretty sick. Of course, it gives you an ability that just doubles your throughput from heal over time effects for 8 seconds on a 1.5 minute cooldown. Costs no mana, Great ability, love this thing, use it early and often. Anytime that you can get value out of it, anytime that there's 8 seconds where you can effectively use the double healing from your heal over times specifically, pretty much always combo with Wild Growth, just use it. Throw it out early in the fight, get the efficiency out there. See this as a mana saving tool more than like an oh shit button in general. You can use it as an oh shit button and it's okay, but you're gonna have either mana issues or throughput problems if you only save this for oh shit moments. And then you're going to go along the top side. This is the normal route. You're going to go along the top side over to Dreamwalker, which makes it so every time you use Wild Growth, you have a 50% chance of instantly healing everybody who has Rejuve on them, your Rejuve, obviously, for a good chunk of healing, like a very big chunk, for sure. And of course, you have to remember they have Rejuve on them, so that's going to be modified by your mastery, at least 1 stack. Very, very powerful. This is going to amount to a large amount of healing as long as you play with it correctly. Very potent, definitely better than the other 2 gold traits in terms of raid healing, as long as you can play with it. And, it is subject to variance because you're not going to be casting an incredibly large amount of Wild Growths in a fight. So it's totally possible for your proc rate in a single fight to maybe be around like 30-ish% instead of the 50% that it's supposed to be. But it's also possible for the other end of the spectrum. You could have it proc on every single one. I would say an average raid fight is somewhere in the 20s of Wild Growth casts for me. Somewhere around there. I guess it depends pretty heavily on the fight, the length of the fight, the intensity of the healing and such. But in general, it's going to be cast less than something like Rejuve, so it is subject to variance, but if it happens about half the time, it's a very, very good throughput trait. And then you want to go down just along this side, right? So basically at this point, you've got Nature's Vigor, Grovewalker, Nature's Essence, Essence of Nordrassil, Dreamwalker, and then grab Armor of the Ancients, Blessing of the World Tree, and then you're going to grab Tranquil Mind. This is the other really good raid-wide talent, or raid-wide healing trait. Makes your Tranquility heal 20% more. And Tranquility, of course, as you probably know, is the strongest raid healing cooldown in the game. Some people might disagree, and I call those people crazy, because holy shit, I can use Tranquility 2 times in a fight, and it does like, I would say probably like 10% of the total healing in a fight, right? Something like that. It's crazy. And I'm talking raids where there's other healers and shit. In my numbers, on like Ursoc, for example, this is normally like 30% of my total healing. Just Tranquility, right? And in Ursoc, I use it like 3 times. So yeah, it's absurd. And also you can use it while moving, which is also great. It's just extra utility. It allows you to actually play with Tranquility in a way that makes sense instead of having to go, okay, so there's some people, okay, they're in range, that's in range, yep, everybody's in range, now I'll hit it. Instead of that, you can just go, okay, yeah, let me get into a spot while I'm actually doing healing. Yeah, okay, right? Very easy, very cool. Love this trait a lot. After you grab Tranquil Mind, you want to backtrack, grab Infusion of Nature, Persistence, Knowledge of the Ancients, and then grab your final gold trait, Power of the Archdruid. So about 1 in 4 Wild Growths will allow you to then get a proc. Hopefully I can get it. Yeah, there we go. So it has like a default thing. You don't have to like get an add-on for this. This is just here. And what it'll allow you to do is basically, if I want to cast Regrowth on this guy, you saw that it also healed me. I got the bulk healing as well as the actual heal over time effect. That's what it does. It'll heal 2 other people within 15 yards of the target. It'll just give them Rejuve or Regrowth, whichever one you're casting. In a raid setting, Regrowth is generally better in that sort of context, but you have to remember that Regrowth is expensive, so you have to think about it that way. In terms of efficiency, Rejuve is going to be better. In terms of just, topping people off, Regrowth is going to be better because it does apply the upfront healing to everybody who gets hit by it. All 3 people will get the upfront healing, which means that it'll probably crit on one of the 3 people at least, and then that person will get Living Seed, which ends up being more healing and such and such. So generally you want to use it on Regrowth, but keep in mind that if people don't need to be topped instantly, you are going to want to use this on Rejuve because it's strictly more efficient. But very cool trait. After you grab your final gold, you want to grab Blooms of Ganir, which is just the final single point that actually matters. Makes life bloom a little bit better. And then I've been going Natural Mending, then Seeds of the World Tree, then Mark of Shifting, and then I'll go into the Paragon. And that's pretty much it for the artifact. In terms of relics that you want, try and get Grovewalker, but in general, eye level is greater than everything. Even if you have a, high 5 eye level difference of a trait like Essence of Nordrassil, and then the 5 eye level lower one was Grove Walker, just go with the Essence of Nordrassil, right? Something like that. I would actually, Infusion of Nature might be one of the worst. That one or Armor of the Ancients, those are probably bottom 2. But like, even if you have one of those, right, and you're replacing a Grove Walker, even if it's like a 1 eye level up, it's probably worth the trade-off. Because eye level is very, very good. But if you're comparing same eye level, try and get Grove Walker. Also, how did you find a Grove Walker? They don't exist in raids. I've looked at all the raids. None of the relics can give you Grove Walker. I'll even show you to prove it. If you look at raids, Emerald Nightmare, Loot, right? That is the Knowledge of the Ancients. That one is the Ironbark one. That one is Essence of Nordrassil. That one is Swiftmend Healing, right? Okay, let's go to Trial of Valor, which is coming out in like a week or something. That one's Knowledge of the Ancients. That one's Living Seed Healing. Okay, that's all the relics in Trial of Valor. Let's look at Nightold, right? Okay, so Essence of Nordrassil. That's the Seeds of the World Tree, right? Okay. That's the Blessing of the World Tree. This is the Infusion of Nature. And that one is Swiftmend Healing, right? So they don't exist from raids. If you can get a high eye level one from Mythic Pluses, obviously if you're aiming to get a Grove Walker trait, the 2 locations, there are 2 that drop, I believe. Yeah, so one is here, the Quivering Blight Shard Husk. So do Neltharian's Lair Mythic Plus. Nelth's is also pretty good in terms of loot. Like, these generally have good stats. Like, the other stuff has generally good stats. There's no Trinket, which kind of sucks, but stuff has okay stats. So, yeah, this is a good one to run. And then the second one, is it Halls of Valor? Halls of Valor is fine, because it gives that one. It is a different one. Black Rick, maybe? I don't remember. Doesn't matter. The point is there's 2. Nelth's is one of them. Try and get Grove Walker. If you can't get Grove Walker, that's okay. Just go highest eye level. Simple as that. Persistence is also pretty good. And same deal, right? Just get highest eye level for your relics. That's the general idea. Because higher eye level gives you more int. And weapons, of course, have a huge bulk of intelligence on them because that's how we get spell power. So increasing the eye level of your weapon is quite substantial because it's a huge jump up in int per eye level. And that just makes all of your spells so much better. And then obviously the secondary stats are fine as well. Crit and Mastery are great. So let's talk about stats. That's a good segue into stats. Okay, so I'm going to say something that might be considered controversial. Stats don't matter, right? They don't matter, okay? These don't fucking matter. There's no, like, don't look for, like, a list that's like, haste is greater than crit, is greater than verse, is greater than mastery. It doesn't, that's not how resto works, right? It just isn't. The reason that that's the case is because your heal over time effects, let's talk about just rejuve. If I do this, right, that's it. This is all the healing that I'm doing. If this is all the healing I'm doing, 1% verse, 1% mastery, 1% haste, and 1% crit are all identical. They are just identical, right? Because crit, 1% of the time you'll do double the healing. That's just a 1% throughput increase. Haste, the hot will tick 1% faster. Mastery, you do 1% more healing as long as there's 1 hot. Versatility is just straight 1% healing increase. It's that simple. So when it comes to heal over time effects, they're all equal. But you do have to remember, of course, that getting certain percents are harder for some and easier for others. And if you look at this, right, crit is my lowest of these 3, mastery is my highest, but if you actually look, mastery is 19%, haste is 20, and crit is 21. So it's kind of the opposite. That is because haste is the easiest stat to get, followed by crit, followed by verse, and then mastery is very hard to get in terms of percent. But mastery has this great bonus of it actually stacks on itself. In the case of 2 rejuves, 1% mastery is going to give me 2% throughput on these rejuves. 1% crit is still 1%. 1% haste is still 1%. 1% verse is always 1%, right? So in the event that you actually have at least 2 hots per person that you're healing, mastery is by far the best stat. This is because mastery is a little better than half as hard to get than haste. If haste is 1.0, let's call this the base value of 1.0. Crit is around like 0.9 something, I don't remember the actual number. Verse is like 0.8 or something, or Is it 0.7 something? It's lower. And then mastery is 0.555. At least that's what I remember. So that means that once you have 2 hots, mastery is just easier to get. You can get half the amount of mastery. Therefore, you double that value and find out that that's actually better than haste. So in the event that you have 2 hots per person that you are healing at all times, mastery is the single best stat that you can get. In general, haste is a great stat because it's the easiest to get. Crit's also good because it actually has value outside of the heal over time effects, unlike haste and mastery. Haste and mastery do very little to non-heal over time effect things. Mastery, of course, if you still have those hots on, it'll still affect the other heals. But crit has the value of giving you living seed. So whenever you crit heal, it'll store a percent of that heal. 25% is the base. It goes up to almost 50% once you have 3 points in your artifact for the bonus. So that means about 20% of the time, I'm going to get an extra 25% heal. You can effectively improve crit by 25% in terms of its value. That actually puts crit, haste, and mastery all insanely close to each other. If you have 2 heals, right? And obviously you can't directly add that number, that 25% number, because your hots don't get the benefit of living seed. They do get the benefit of crit, just not from living seed. But in general, they're all so close that it actually doesn't fucking matter, right? It just really doesn't matter. In general, go with eye level. I would recommend aiming for haste. Again, it is the easiest to get, is the most ubiquitous stat. It's good in 5-mans, it's good in raids. Mastery does lose value in raids because you're not always going to have multiple hots on people, but it is still quite strong in raids because in events where you are going to have multiple hots on people, you get a lot more throughput. So if you're only focused on raids, haste and crit are the way to go. If you do raids and 5-man content, just keep them all equal. If you only do 5-man content, mastery above everything else, right? That's simple. I love Restoration Druid stats because of this. So many people hate them because of this. So many people are arguing. If you actually look at the forums, people are like, I've created this incredibly complex mathematical formula to figure out the stat weights. And it's like, you don't need that. You could just look. You could just look at the numbers, right? Like you could do this, right? You could break out a fucking calculator like you're in school, right? And go crit. Okay, 5492. Let's go divided by 15%, so 0.1569. No, times. I don't know, man. Listen, all right, I forgot how to do this. The point is that you could just mathematically calculate these, right? Like you can figure out how many points per percent. In fact, that would be how about I just go, hang on, 5492 divided by 15.69, right? So that's how many points it takes to get a percent of crit. 350 crit rating per 1% of crit. Very simple, right? Haste, 6410, 1972. 6410. 1972, right? Yeah. Takes 325, right? So you can see that it's easier to get a percent of haste than it is a percent of crit. Cool. Then you look at mastery. A401 is 1440. Very simple. Takes a lot of mastery to get 1%. But you have to remember that in the event that you have 2 hots per person out at all, right? 3 hots, it makes it even better. But just talking about 2 hots, which is a relatively easy goal to meet, especially when you have cultivation or the legendary tear stone and balloon, you just divide this number by 2. This is the effective healing, right? And you compare this to haste, which was 325. This is already better, right? And then you could also do versatility. But it's very, I already have like the 1%, right? So I already know. It's obviously a bit lower than this, but it's that simple, right? You don't need to have these super complex formulas and shit. Obviously, you have to understand that, crit has benefits outside of heal over time effects. So it is slightly better than, the number that we came up with. Haste is also, depending on the way that you're healing, slightly worse than the number we came up with, because obviously haste doesn't really affect things like regrowth or healing touch or tranquility. It will make them come out faster, but the actual throughput per spell will not go up on healing touch or tranquility. So you have to, knock it down a little bit. And then mastery in a raid setting, you have to kind of knock it down a little bit. But it's like, they're so equal. It honestly doesn't matter. Just go with eye level. Int is already the best stat. Even on all of these like stat calculation things, int is so far and away the best stat that like you're pretty much always going to go with eye level upgrade anyway. The only cases that I personally don't go with an eye level upgrade is if it's like a 5 eye level up and the piece that I would be going to has a lot of versatility on it. And the reason that I'm doing that is because in the event that mastery is good, versatility is our worst stat by a good margin, right? By a pretty hefty margin. So in general, I will decline on something that say has like, versatility mastery with like a higher weight of versatility. I mean, like this maybe. Obviously, this has more mastery. Difference is that compared to the other gloves I had, this was like a 20 eye level up, and it has a socket. So this is actually quite good. And the reason that I'm saying that you still want as much haste as possible, obviously I'm a little low on the haste side, right? Like my haste is a bit low. But the reason you want so much haste is because, again, it's just the easiest stat to get. It's the most ubiquitous stat. And as such, you should be getting haste enchants on your rings. You should be getting haste gems, right? And that's pretty much it, right? So you just want to gem and enchant for haste. And then the other stats mostly don't matter. Let's talk about legendaries, because I have two. I have Essence of Infusion and Pride As. Essence of Infusion is quite strong in raid setting. It makes Tranquility quite a bit better, and that's great. Obviously, if people aren't dropping under half, Tranquility is not going to heal them 50% more. But also, why are you using Tranquility? Right? Like, for what purpose are you using Tranquility when people aren't under half HP? Like using this when everybody is at like 70% HP is just a waste of a cooldown. So it makes it so pretty much all of your Tranquilities are going to generally be better because you're always using it when people are low, right? That's a good use of Tranquility is when people are under half. Obviously not everybody's going to be under half, so it's not strictly a 50% heal upgrade to Tranquility, but it can definitely be powerful on a fight like Ursoc. Any fight that has like predictable damage, any fight that has Inner Peace as a good talent, Essence of Infusion is going to be a great legendary. Pride As, this is the joke. This is the one where you're like, yeah, I got Pride As, now I can fashion it into a noose and hang myself. But the thing about Pride As is that it's actually really good, and people are stupid because they're dumb and they don't think that this is good because it doesn't say your insert damaging ability does insert percent more, right? It doesn't say that. So everybody thinks it's bad, but it's really good, right? This shield, the shield is 15% of your max health. In my case, almost 370k at this point. 370k. You want to look at some numbers? That's a Swift Mend, right? This is a free Swift Mend every 30 seconds. Obviously, it's only on you, but in a raid setting, everybody is going to be taking damage at some point. So it's always going to be absorbing damage. People obviously are saying like, oh, but it's terrible on dragons and Cenarius and Nithendra because there's constant damage happening. I have not noticed this not work. Like, it'll always apply the shield on those fights, right? Unless I'm taking direct damage from something, it'll apply. Those little tick damages, they don't seem to cancel it. So it's really good on those fights, actually, because every 30 seconds, you get this huge bulk shield to just absorb a lot of that damage, a lot of that rot damage. So it's very good. It also has pretty good secondaries. I mean, like I said, you want as much haste as possible. This doesn't have haste, so it must be bad. But it gives a shitload of mastery. And if you are doing a more mastery-focused build, if you are running with the cultivation build, or you are doing 5-man content, mastery is awesome. So this is sick, right? This thing is sick. Also, it has a socket. So I put my 200 int gem in it, because that thing cost me 20 goddamn thousand gold. And I'm not gonna put that in other shit, right? I'm not gonna put that in like a gloves that have mediocre stats that I'm gonna replace at some point, right? I'm gonna stick that shit in a legendary and then cry myself to sleep at night when I get another one and have to replace this. It's pretty much that simple. But yeah, I think Pride As is like the most underrated legendary that is in the game right now. And the reason people hate it so much is because it doesn't say that it increases their DPS, and everybody wants to jerk off on themselves, you know, all about how good their DPS is, right? Who cares, right? You know what good DPS does? they don't die. You know what Pride As helps you do? Not die. Therefore, it's a great DPS legendary, right? A dead DPS is no DPS. Who cares if in the first 3 seconds of a fight you did fucking 2 million DPS if you're dead 2 seconds later? You know, it doesn't matter, and this helps you survive, right? It helps the healers, it helps you, it's just great. This thing is awesome. Let's look at the other legendaries, of course. So in general, all of the legendaries for druids are actually quite good, except for Cephas' Secret, and I'll talk about why that is in a moment. Obviously, I kind of already touched on it, but we'll get to it. In general, they're all quite good. Number 1 being Tearstone of Elune, and then the next kind of bracket would be like Edgewraith, Aman'Thul's Wisdom, and Essence of Infusion, all relatively close. Edgewraith is, I think, a bit above these other two. And then the bottom tier is pretty much the 4 on the left. So let's talk about the ones we haven't talked about. Echo Wraith, the effect is great. You know, 50% more effect from all the passive effects. You get 2, depending on your spec. This does work in all specs, obviously. It's fine. You know, it makes Thick Hide prevent 9% of the total damage you're taking instead of 6. It makes Ysera's Gift heal for, what's the base? I always forget the number. 3%. It'll heal for 4.5% of your max health every 5 seconds. It's pretty good. And then obviously if you have Feline Swiftness, you'll go like 22.5% faster. And if you have Astral Influence, it'll give you 7.5 yards extra range. Very simple, very effective. Nice thing about it is that it's pretty much always going to be an eye level upgrade, and in the event that it is an eye level upgrade, you're going to roll with it because it gives you a shitload of int. I mean, in my case, right, I'm upgrading 25 eye levels, and that is giving me 410 intellect. That's pretty crazy, right? So, pretty good legendary. It being the chest means that it does have quite a heavy stat weight. I think is it the highest stat weight? Chests have the highest stat weight? 1900. Well, highest of the legendaries for sure. I think it probably is the highest in general. So definitely solid because of that. The Dark Titan's Advice is fine. It has crit haste, which makes it good. Again, it's a piece that has int, so if it's an eye level up, it's probably better. And then it makes Life Bloom's Expire heal, the Bloom effect heal for 200% more. So basically just 3 times the healing. And that makes it actually heal pretty comparable to something like Swiftmend. So in the event the Life Bloom is expiring soon, and you can refresh it and immediately trigger that bloom, and the person needs healing, it's going to be pretty powerful. I mean, it's cheaper than Swiftmend, and it doesn't even have a cooldown, right? So it can definitely be good, but a lot of the time the bloom effect is overhealing anyway, because you're pretty much always keeping Life Bloom on a tank. And if the tank... like, the sort of health of the tank is never really going to line up really smoothly with Life Bloom, right? And by the way, the reason I said, like, under 5 seconds is because if you refresh it, it'll bloom, right? If it's in the pandemic duration, which is about 30% of the original max duration, which is roughly under 5 seconds on the first cast, it'll just bloom effect there. So you want to, like, be able to do that a lot, especially if you have this. But a lot of the time, the tank's health, it won't line up in a way that you can actually utilize all that Life Bloom healing. It'll probably be overhealing a lot. So the effect, most of the time, will not actually get a lot of use. But again, has good stats, has int. I'll talk about Cephas' Secret last. Let's talk about these other 3 on this side. So Aman'Thul's Wisdom is pretty good. Again, shoulders, so it has int, so it's already going to be good. And then, of course, it actually allows you to play even deeper into this whole put rejuves up then wild growth playstyle, because your rejuves will last longer, right? Up to 10 seconds longer, effectively. If people are taking damage, this won't do anything. The effect won't do anything if people are taking constant damage. But if you can predict the damage, which most raid encounters, you can predict the damage really well. In those sort of scenarios, this is going to see a lot of beneficial use because you can start prejuving up to 10 seconds out before they even begin ticking. Normally you prejuve like 3 to 5 seconds out, which allows you to get, 3 to 5 rejuves out, give or take, before the damage comes in. But with this, you could get upwards of 10 out. Now, whether or not getting 10 out is what you want to do, who knows? But it definitely has a lot of potential value, as long as you can utilize it well. Edge Wraith, the effect allows Swiftmen to extend the heal over time effects on the target that you're hitting by 10 seconds. This is phenomenal. Obviously, it works with Wild Growth and Cenarian Ward best. Like, if you have both Wild Growth and Cenarian Ward on the target, and sure, you know, Rejuve as well, Swiftmen is going to be crazy to use on them. And that's mostly because adding 10 seconds to Cenarian Ward, especially if you're also adding the 6 seconds from Flourish, you're tripling the healing of Cenarian Ward just innately with those two things being used. It'll go to 24 seconds instead of 8 seconds. So very, very powerful when comboed with Cenarian Ward. Honestly, in my opinion, if you have like any legendary, if you have Aman'Thul's Wisdom, Edge Wraith, or Tearstone, I would recommend this build, right? Any of those top three, I would recommend this build quite heavily. Obviously, changing out the Germination for Inner Peace or Spring Blossoms, depending on the fight. Because all three actually help that build a lot. Aman'Thul's Wisdom, of course, allows you to get more rejuves out, therefore more cultivation will happen. That just kind of innately, you know, increases its power level. Already talked about Essence of Infusion. You know what, I'll talk about Ceph as a secret and then end on a good note for the legendaries. So, secret, it's fine, right? It gives you a good chunk of secondary stats, good secondary stats too. There's no verse on it. Obviously, no legendaries, as far as I know, have verse on them. So, you know, that's already fine. It is jewelry, so it has a lot of them. It also has a socket, which is great. And then successfully applying a loss of control effect to an enemy grants you 70% increased movement speed and 15% haste for 10 seconds, and it can only happen every 30 seconds. This, of course, has the problem because Entangling Roots is the only built-in way that we can actually trigger this. Nothing else can trigger it, or Soul's Vortex does not. At least that's what I've been told. I don't have this, so I can't test personally. These are just things other people have said. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But from what I've heard, Entangling Roots is the only way to do it. War Stomp does trigger it because it's a stun, and then, of course, the Bash that you could talent into will also do it because that is also a stun. If you can trigger a loss of control effect every 30 seconds, this is actually pretty good. But on a raid fight, you generally will not ever trigger one of those effects, right? It's a very rare occurrence to trigger one of those effects. It requires an ad fight, and it also requires you to actually take time out of healing to do a CC effect. But 15% haste is awesome, right? That's a huge number. So it is very good in the situations where it is good, but there's a lot of situations where it is not good. And that's why it's the worst legendary. It could totally be good for Mythic Pluses because at least I War Stomp a lot in Mythic Plus. Obviously, if you're not a Tauren, you're playing the wrong race, but you'll also get less value out of this. Let's talk about Tearstone of Elune. This is the big daddy. So this thing is one of the best legendaries across all classes. If you include DPS legendaries, this is it's top 10 for sure. It might be top 5, I'm not sure, in terms of value that it gives. It's very, very good though. So first of all, let's look at the stats. It gives you haste weighted highest, which is great because haste is the one that you do want the highest because it's the easiest stat to get percent of. And then it has mastery. And also, it also innately increases the value of mastery just because it's already putting multi-hots on people with the effect, which I'll talk about in a second. So Tearstone on its own increases the value of mastery, therefore the mastery on it is actually really good. It has a socket as well. If I ever get this, that's what I'll put my int gem in, and I'll never get rid of this ever again. It'll be there forever until the end of time, or the expansion, whichever comes first, which at this rate, who knows? But yeah, the effect. Allies healed by Wild Growth have a 20% chance to also gain Rejuvenation. Now, don't be fooled. This does not mean every tick of Wild Growth has a chance to give you Rejuve on those targets. It means that when you cast Wild Growth, right there, out of the 6 people getting hit, each has a 20% chance to also get Rejuve at that point. And that is very, 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 very powerful. As we've talked about before, Rejuve is kind of our bread and butter, right? We want Rejuve to be doing stuff a lot of the time. Like this is what we're doing a lot. Like it has synergy with Wild Growth. And obviously, Wild Growth has a 10-second cooldown. Rejuve has an 18-second duration. That means you can kind of overlap these effects. And it actually might be possible, even in a raid setting, that with Tearstone, you want Germination. Because the way it works currently is that if a person rolls to get Rejuve, but they already have Rejuve on them, it'll just reapply it. But if you have Germination, it'll put the second application on them, assuming they didn't have it. So it might actually be possible that going Germination, double rejuve when you have Tearstone is actually worth it, even in a raid setting. I'm not sure. I don't think there's enough people that have Tearstone and Balloon that can really test it, but it definitely increases the value of Mastery. There will be times where 0 people get rejuve, and this is just a ring that gives you stats, and even then it's a really good ring. But there will also be times where all 6 people will get rejuve. The average, you can expect about 1 person per wild growth to also get rejuve, but there will be times where 0 happens, there will be times where 6 happens, and, you know, the entire spectrum, this is still a really good legendary, right? Very good, even at the very bottom of the spectrum. So, awesome legendary. If you ever get your hands on this, never give it up. Just grab it, you know, make sure you're not a stranger to love, and move on with your life and just keep using it. Trinkets are a bit difficult for Resto Druid, and this is going to be the last thing that I touch on, aside from general cooldown usage, but trinkets are tough. And the reason trinkets are tough is because it's not like a DPS. You can't just simulate, oh, this does higher DPS, right, in single target or in multi-target or whatever, right? You can't really do that with healing. You could theoretically simulate healing for throughput, and that would give you the best throughput trinkets, but that's not how raids work. You're not just constantly casting spells, using every GCD to do a spell that heals, and just aiming for the highest number possible. Unless you want to, you know, big dick all over Warcraft logs. That's not how raid fights work. Raid fights are very hard to simulate the actual, like, taking the damage. Obviously, you can't even simulate accidental damage. There's, like, no way to do that. And stuff like that. So you can't really simulate trinkets. The best way that you can actually figure out what trinket you want to use is just wearing them and gathering your own data, right? Whether it could be as simple as just from, you know, just a damage meter. Looking at healing, right? You like click your name, you look at the specific numbers and go, oh, this trinket, Vial of Nightmare Fog, is doing 5% of my total healing. That's really good, right? Something like that. Or looking at your logs and seeing the proc rate and stuff like that, right? The best way to do it is just do it. Take your own data, do your own testing, and figure out what works for you. I will say a good rule of thumb as a Resto Druid is you don't need a trinket that really improves your mana efficiency, unless it's Darkmoon Deck Promises. If you can get your hands on a Darkmoon Deck Promises, go for it. A lot of the top druids are using it. It's very potent. If you don't know what it does, it basically makes it so periodically, like you have a buff, and periodically that buff will change, and it'll just reduce the mana cost of all of your spells by a flat amount of mana, right? And like it has a range of low to high mana costs and stuff like that. And over the course of a fight, it does save a lot of mana, especially if you're using Rejuve a lot, which you are. It's very good, and the main reason it's actually good is because it gives you int. Darkmoon Deck Promises gives you a lot of intellect, right? Saves you a lot of mana, gives you a lot of int. Great trinket. Outside of that, who knows? I mean, you don't really want, like I said, you don't really want an efficiency trinket like Cocoon. Again, it gives int, and it does give you mana back, but that on use is actually incredibly weak. Of course, if you look, this is the mythic version. That gives you 75,000 mana for you doing nothing for 10 seconds. Nothing. You do literally nothing for 10 full seconds to get 75,000 mana. That's a wild growth. Right? Like, that's awful. It's just really bad. If you have this, though, and it's a high eye level, sure, go with it for the end. And, you can get some use out of the effect. But in general, this is a pretty bad trinket. Generally, I mean, in my case, I'm using Ethereal Urn, in a similar sort of slot because it gives you a shitload of int. A lot of trinkets, like Vial of Nightmare Fog, do not actually give intellect, and intellect is still your top stat. So if you can get your hands on at least one trinket that has int on it, you probably want to roll with it. So that's why I'm using the Ethereal Urn. If you don't know where this comes from, it comes from Nightbane in Karazhan, the new Karazhan dungeon. It has all main stats on it, and then Mastery. I'm assuming it can Titan Forge. It's a pretty good trinket. I like it a lot. And then I'm using Vial of Nightmare Fog, which drops off of Dragons of Nightmare in Emerald Nightmare. And this is also super good. It does heal about 5% of my total healing in a normal fight, and that's a lot, right? That's actually like a very large number. That's about what you want to be looking for with one of these proc trinkets. So this is what I'm currently rolling with. A lot of people are rolling with a huge variety of stuff. I mean, you got so many choices. I'm holding on to all these choices in the event that I might actually use them. You know, maybe one of them gets buffed or whatever. Like I have a Horn of Cenarius at 860. It's fine. It's actually pretty bad. The main problem with this is that the heal bomb, like the Wisp heal, does not scale with your mastery, and it's a very low AoE for the burst, so not so great. I also have Chrono Shard 855. This one is really good because it gives Trinket, or it gives Trinket. It is a Trinket. It gives Int, but it also gives haste on a proc, and a proc's relatively often. So this is definitely a very strong Trinket. If you have a high eye level Chrono Shard, go with it. If this was higher than, I mean, even if this was 875 flat, like I would probably roll with this over Ethereal Urn. I also have the Arcano Crystal from Withered Gym. I have a Naglfar Fair from Maw of Souls. This one's okay. This is one of the weaker proc trinkets that I've rolled with. It never really did a lot of healing for me. It's fine though. I have Concave Reflecting Lens, which did comparable healing to Vial of Nightmare Fog. The main reason that I changed is because as my eye level went higher, obviously I just healed more, and this ended up doing less and less percent, and this is still doing about 5% of my total healing right now at 876 eye level, so this is just better currently for me. I also have a Heightened Senses at 870. A lot of people are rolling with this over a stat stick like Ethereal Urn. This has about 25 to 30% uptime on the effect, which is pretty good. Problem is that it can proc in situations where it's bad, and you don't really want that much variance as a healer, even though Restoration Druid already has quite a bit of variance with the artifact abilities, you know, like Dreamwalker and Power of the Archdruid. There's a lot of variance already, so you really don't want even more of it. Whoops. And then my final one that I am stockpiling is the Fluctuating Energy from New Kara. I think if I get the Nightbane chest, this might be okay, but I'm not sure. Again, this is one of the mana efficiency trinkets, so it gives Int on it. This one actually might be good, depending on proc rate. Yeah, and with the Nightbane chest, which amplifies all the Karazhan trinkets, it could actually be even better. And it has the socket on it, which could definitely be useful as well. But it's only 860, so I'm not sure if I would roll with it. But yeah, just keep all your trinkets, fiddle with them, get your own data, figure out what's best. If you don't know what's best, again, rule of thumb, get one with Int on it, one with a proc, and go with highest eye level you got. It's not a great rule of thumb, but if you're really lazy, feel free. And that's mostly it. Let's talk about briefly the final thing about cooldowns. So your main cooldowns, you have Flourish, you have Essence of Ganir, you have Innervate, you have Tranquility, and that's pretty much the main like cooldowns that you have as a Resto Druid. So let's talk about them. You also have Ironbark. So Flourish and Essence of Ganir combo with each other as much as you can, right? Because you always want to combo Essence of Ganir with Wild Growth, right? But this only lasts 7 seconds. Essence gives you increased healing for 8. And Flourish you always want to combo with Wild Growth already, right? Like both of these you already want to combo with Wild Growth, therefore always try and combo with each other. They won't always line up because Flourish is a 1 minute cooldown, Essence of Ganir is a 1.5 minute cooldown, but then again sometimes you won't want to immediately use Flourish again after it comes off cooldown, maybe you don't need to. But just keep in mind that both of these want to be used with Wild Growth always, and you know, if you can use them with each other, go for it. So those are the main things with them. Like I said earlier, just use them early and often. Just figure out like, okay, I could use a little bit of extra healing now, use them, and then later in the fight they can be back up for an oh shit moment if needed. Hopefully they're not needed for an oh shit moment. Hopefully the oh shit moment is covered by something like Tranquility. A lot of the time you're going to figure out a rotation between your healer cooldowns for when to use it in a fight. However, if it is a fight with a lot of like unpredictable damage and not a lot of like high damage phases, say Cenarius, right? Cenarius, the times to use Tranquility are just when people are dumb. When too many people have taken too much damage and are just dying, you just want to be able to use Tranquility. So like in those sort of situations, play it by ear. Try and call out popping Trank, right? Like say it in your voice channel. Make sure your other healers know. So like if you pop Trank, another druid doesn't pop Trank, or a priest doesn't pop Divine Hymn, as if that ever healed anything. A paladin doesn't pop Aura Mastery, a shaman doesn't pop Healing Tide, whatever, right? Make sure that people actually know you're popping it so they can save theirs for the next oh shit moment. If it's, a fight where you can't really predict the damage, like I said, Cenarius. However, if the damage is predictable, say Ursoc, or even Elareth, something like that, you probably just have a rotation and there's not much thought that needs to go into it. Keep in mind in 5-man content, Tranquility also heals for double. So any sort of situation where people are dying too fast, because in 5-man content, some other healers might have an ability, like a Holy Priest has the ability to drop like an AoE thing that heals for a good chunk, just a huge chunk of health on a group of people in an AoE, right? Holy Pally has a similar thing, stuff like that, right? Other classes actually can deal with like unanticipated burst damage very quickly. They can kind of clean it up pretty well. Druid, nope. You really can't. Your best case scenario is, okay, damage has happened, rejuve, wild growth, cross your fingers, right? Like that's generally how it goes when, you get into an oh shit moment. However, if you just pop Trank, this will cover the oh shit moment pretty well, right? Being able to heal your entire party, like all 5 of your party members for somewhere around 1 million in my case. Obviously that says 400k, so you'd say 800k, but some people are going to have hots. The tank is going to have hots for sure. Other people might have hots. Also in a 5-man, you're always going to pop Wild Growth before Trank. At least you should, unless it's happened and Wild Growth is still on cooldown and it's still really bad. But in 5-mans, this is great to cover up oh shit moments. Yeah, and in 5-mans, the oh shit moments are like always on trash. So, using it every 3 minutes, who knows? Just play it by ear. It's pretty easy to figure out, honestly. I never have had an issue. And I haven't heard of anybody having an issue of when to pop Trank in 5-mans. It's mostly a raid issue. And again, like I said, in raids, play it by ear. If a lot of people are low, say popping Trank, pop Trank, make sure people are getting healed up, and you're good to go. Now, the other cooldowns that we have, Ironbark and Innervate, obviously you also have Bark Skin. This one's pretty self-explanatory. Oh, I'm about to take damage, pop Bark Skin. You can do that every minute. Pretty simple. Ironbark, you want to use this before damage comes in. After damage comes in, like if a big spike comes in, this is already useless, right? You want to prevent 26% of that big spike. So best times to use this are when a tank is about to soak a mechanic, like a tank swap mechanic, like let's say on Ursoc, right? Ursoc's a great example. Wait for the tank. I don't actually really fully understand how our tanks are doing the fight, to be completely honest, so keep that in mind. But if I sound like I have no idea what's going on, it's because I really don't. But let's say a tank has like a Ren Flesh stack, right? And they're about to get a second Ren Flesh stack. You can Ironbark them, right? Because Ren Flesh, it does damage over time, and it stacks up. And it's like, oh shit, they're about to take damage, and maybe even the ad is running in, and they're the one picking it up. If you're on Mythic, then you want to Ironbark them, and it can prevent 26% of the damage for 12 seconds. That's going to be really good. Should you ever use this on non-tanks and raids? Probably not. It's probably never going to save as much damage as if you put it on a tank. So generally just use it on a tank. You could be a hero and like a big burst is coming in, one person's like extra low compared to the other people, and you throw the Ironbark over to him and you're like, catch this, right? And then you just throw it to him and he catches it and he's like, thanks, and then he barely survives it because you Ironbarked him. Sure, that could happen. But in general, you're going to be using this on tanks. Even in dungeons, you're going to be using it on tanks, especially because tanks take the brunt of the damage in a dungeon. However, if you can use it on somebody else, go for it. Tonight we just did a Court of Stars plus 10, and on the final boss, because he does unavoidable damage to everybody, stacking up as the fight goes on, getting higher and higher, I actually used Ironbark on a non-tank, because in that time frame, the tank isn't taking any extra damage than anybody else, but they have extra health to soak it. So I put it on somebody else to prevent them from dying, basically. So there's uses outside of being on tanks, but in a raid, it's pretty much always going to be used on a tank, and you're just going to use it when you say, oh, I think damage is coming in. Boom. Done. Don't think about it too much. 1.5 minute cooldown. You can use it like 3 times in a fight, maybe 4 times. whatever, it's good. Innervate is the tough one. This is the one that a lot of people mess up, myself included. I still mess it up. It is a very difficult spell to use if you are not doing something special with your Innervate, if you are just using it on yourself, which is, I would say, the most common sort of thing. I can explain that. I will briefly mention that if you have a Discipline Priest, I have been told that innervating a Discipline Priest prior to a big damage burst is quite powerful. Because it gives them 10 seconds to basically get atonement on 100% of people in the raid, and then they can use their artifact ability that does damage based on the atonements they have to just like nuke, and then everybody just burst heals way back up. But to do that, it costs a lot of mana, so if you innervate them in that case, it's really good. But in general, you're going to be using it on yourself and not thinking too much of it. When you do use it on yourself, keep in mind it only lasts 10 seconds, and Wild Growth has a 10-second cooldown. This means you cannot get 2 Wild Growths in an Innervate. It is not possible because it just isn't, right? It's just not possible. It could theoretically be possible if Wild Growth didn't have a cast time, but even then it would be really, really tight. You'd basically have to do it like... It depends on like if the 10 seconds are measured the same, is basically what I'm saying. So you're always going to get 1 Wild Growth in an Innervate. So in my personal opinion, I think the best way to innervate is wait until you've already cast Wild Growth, and maybe like 1 or 2 seconds afterwards, innervate yourself. Then you want to use Rejuve for the entire duration of innervate. Get Rejuve on every single person you can during this duration of innervate, and then when you have about 2 seconds left, depending on your haste obviously, about 2 seconds left, you want to cast Wild Growth immediately ended with Efflorescence, right? This wants to happen as the very final action in Innervate. And the reason that you want to do that is because that alone, right? So Wild Growth is 70,000 mana, Efflorescence is almost 50,000. That's a lot of mana savings just from those 2 spells alone. And the reason that you're Wild Growthing at the end instead of at the start, you're only getting 1. But if Dreamwalker procs, then you get value out of all those rejuves that you've thrown out. There will be times where you need to kind of flash heal people, right? Like Rejuve is not going to cut it. People are dying too quickly. And in those cases, feel free to use Regrowth a lot of the time, but hopefully that's not when you're using Innervate, right? Like hopefully you guys have healing under control enough that that sort of situation doesn't really pop up, and that you can just do the highest throughput possible in order to utilize Innervate, right? And the highest throughput is going to be lots of Rejuves ended with a Wild Growth and an Efflorescence. And the reason, like I said, that you end with Efflorescence is because this costs a lot of mana, but it also is really good. If you can cast this for free, this is your single best spell. Even for the amount of mana that it is, it's a very efficient spell, like incredibly efficient, as long as all of the healing that it's doing is effective, which obviously is not always the case. But if it's free, yeah, do it, right? Like in that last GCD, what else are you squeezing in? Right? Wild Growth is being cast, and you want the cast to finish before Innervate goes off, because if it finishes after Innervate's gone, it'll still cost the mana. So you still have 1 GCD at the end of your Innervate to do something. The highest mana cost spell you could do in that time frame is an Efflorescence. So just do it. Obviously, you want to like aim it. You don't want to just be like, okay, Innervate's ending, and melee's over here and range is over here. Innervate's ending. You know, like that's not gonna do anything. This is bad. This is dumb. Just put it over there, right? You always want it to be kind of close to tanks, so tanks can actually get the benefit of it. Because especially at the start of a fight, a tank is you always want this to be under tanks because nobody's really gonna take damage at the start of the fight except tanks. So at least allow this to do some effective healing, right? And that's pretty much it. That's Restoration Druid. Hopefully this incredibly long, rambly video was of use to you. I wanted to go a little bit more in depth than a lot of the like guide videos go, so obviously it went a bit longer, but maybe I didn't cover something. If I didn't cover something, please let me know. Talk in the comments, ask about it, be like, hey, what about this thing? I would happily respond. I will happily give as much advice as possible. My guild is only 1 out of 7 mythic. We're a 2-day raiding guild, but I am 876 item level. My highest accomplished mythic plus, at least in general, was this week. It was Neltharion Slayer 11. I think we might push 15 next week. I don't remember what next week's affixes are going to be, but we might push 15 at some point in the near future. The affixes we got here were actually like awful for getting to plus 15, mostly fortified. So we've decided to kind of, you know, not. Basically just not. Also, they're really fucking hard, but yeah. So there's my credibility. You know, if you're better than me, know better than me, also call me an idiot. Sure, man. Let me know, right? And we can talk about it. But that's pretty much it. That's the video. Hopefully this was helpful. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you guys later.